We are privileged tonight to have someone who is a bit of a legend and a hero in the bicycling community across the country. She's probably too modest for me to say that. Nicole Freedman was responsible, probably more than any other individual, and certainly more than any group, for the transformation that happened in Boston. Anybody like Boston for bicycling anymore? It got a lot better, didn't it? Nicole's doing made that happen. Years ago, we used to, in the day, we used to talk about a triple threat, somebody who could run and hit and catch. Nicole's a triple threat in bicycling. It has redefined the triple threat in bicycling. We used to be, ride, ride, and ride. Now it's design and implement. That's what she can do. Teach and inspire. And last but not least, she can ride pretty well. Olympics, year 2000, our team.
Yeah.
Nicole Freedman.
Great introduction. What he didn't know was I have a record. I was the only Little Leaguer in the history of Wellesley, where I grew up, to have a no-hitter season. I was not a pitcher. I got up one game and the boys all started crying. Okay, so we're going to talk about biking and complete streets. We're going to go through a little bit of history and get right up to the present and where cities are going these days. But people always ask a little about me, so I actually included that in this presentation. So I'll give you a little background before my job. But I graduated college, called up my parents and said, I'm going to be a professional bike racer. They were thrilled when they finally picked up the phone off the floor. They said, get a real job. And I didn't get it at first, but I always say the NBA takes poor kids and makes them rich. Professional cycling takes rich kids and makes them poor. So these are my actual first year results. And you can see I actually crashed twice in one race. This was not a phenomenal race. You really have to be not so smart to crash twice in a race. I mean, it's just swerve over just so I could catch it. It did get better. My second year, I made the US national team, got on a professional team. And in women's racing, I got my first salary on a professional team. It was $15 per race day, capping out at $800. So I bought myself a house. It was a 1974 Econoline van. Parked it in the Bay Area. I was a homeowner at 24 in the Bay Area in the during the dot-com boom. And I did live there for 4 years while I was professional racing. So lots of ups and downs in racing. But in the end, I did make the 2000 Olympics. So it's kind of interesting when you go to the Olympics. At some point after 2000, I decided I was ready to retire from professional racing. And I did have a degree in urban planning. And so I'm reading the help wanteds at the time in the paper because we didn't have the internet. And all the jobs that I felt like I was qualified for said costume provided. So I did get lucky. I always say anytime good things happen, it's a combination of luck and maybe something else that you have control. But September 20th, 2007, Mayor Menino of Boston said, we are going to transform Boston into a world-class cycling city. And he points to me and he says, Nicole, work on the details. It was quite a task. Bicycling Magazine had us 3 times rated the worst cycling city in the country. We had an international award for worst cycling city in the world, and they gave it to us early because there was no one competitive with us. And it was kind of justified. When I started, we had 180 feet of bike lane. And you can see it here. It started there and it ends here. So there it is, 180 feet. So we had a rule, and it was just start already. People said we need to do a master plan, and we should plan. And I said, it is so obvious what we need to do. And we had advocates. One had been advocating for 27 years. This is what he had gotten. So our philosophy is just start already. And we added bike lanes. So this was mid-2000. But we took our charge, and our charge was really to change culture. It was to get people to bike. And I think the thing that's really important is you're never going to get everyone to bike. And we said, what are we trying to do? We're not really trying to build bike facilities for me because I'm pretty comfortable biking on any road there is, any highway. And we're not trying to build bike lanes for my dad. We got him a bike for his 60th birthday, and he said, Nicole, return this thing, I'm never going to use it. But my mom lives in the suburbs, and she bikes on the weekends. If she comes to the Cape, the first thing she packs is her bike because there's rail trails, and she loves it. We're designing for her, and we're designing for my nephew, who didn't even know what a bike was because his parents don't think it's safe for him. We got him a bike for his 5th birthday, and he said, it's broken. And we said, what do you mean it's broken? He says, well, it needs a battery. So we started adding bike lanes. So early 2000s, we did SHAROs, shared lane markings. And this basically says we're not separating out space for the bikes from the cars, but we're just putting basically, warning signs that remind people that you're using the same space. They are moderately, nominally effective, but not much. There's not many people that are going to make a big difference. And we added bike lanes, standard 1, 5 feet wide, paint on both sides, and we started striping. And we always tried to do a little better, a little more. We put our 5-foot bike lanes downtown whenever we could, get them right in the heart of the city. This is Beacon Street in Boston. We made them wider whenever we could. So this one is 7 feet wide. Wow. 7 feet is lovely because 2 people can go side by side, and there's a beautiful reservoir. It's on the reservoir side. We used green highlights, and the whole point is conflict areas. And people said, you can never put a bike lane here. This is right at the BU Bridge on Commonwealth Avenue. It makes it better, and the green works. It's not perfect, but it's better than doing nothing. And then we tried to get inventive, so we decided to create SHAROs, priority shared lane markings. The Globe dubbed these SHAROs on steroids, and the whole thing was let's make them green backed, and it's a reminder that maybe the cyclist can go right down the middle of the street. So Globe called them SHAROs on steroids, which as a professional bike racer is probably the last thing you should use. I'm not really a fan of Lance Armstrong. Okay, and then we looked at turns, and we do things like bike boxes and 2-lane turn boxes to help people make turns in challenging areas. So all told, we built 92 miles. Given we started at 180 feet, if we do a little mathematics gymnastics, that's a 3,625% increase in bike lane miles in about 5 years. And it worked. So our rankings went way up. We went from the worst cycling city in the country to one of the top rated cities. Our score, actually I saw a rating as high as 2nd once. That one was alphabetical. Okay, but look, so again, we're trying to design for people like my mom, and she's kind of smart, and she says, hey Nicole, this is paint. Like, what's keeping this trolley from actually going over the paint and hitting this person, especially with cell phones? And the answer is, well, Mom, you're right. So there's a great study that came out of Portland that said, without a bike lane anywhere on the street, you might get 1%, the strong and fearless out biking. You put in paint, you might get up to 7% of the population biking. But we need to do more and better. So cities all over the country have actually stopped putting in bike lanes and really converted to protected bike lanes. This is the new bike lane. And the whole thing is, how do we get the 8 to 80 crowd, 8 years old to 80? How do we get all the people that want to be biking that are too scared? And I've always said the Cape is sort of my dream for biking. It's the most amazing place. Everybody that comes here, especially in the summer, no one wants to be driving. They all want to be biking, and they all want to be walking. And all we have to do is make it safe, and they will do that. I mean, the first thing everyone packs is their bike in their car. So protected bike lanes, you can have any style protected bike lane you want. This one is a really quite simple one. It is paint, and it's flexible delineator posts. These are about $100 each. And they basically designate where the car shouldn't go. They're reflective. It makes it feel protected to the cyclist. But this is low cost. This is really just a sort of a retrofit paint and post. 2-lane sidewalk level. You're not affecting drainage. You don't need to repave. Very simple facility. This is Kinsey Street in Chicago. Not much different, but it does use the cars to add a physical protection as well. So these cars can't really swerve over and hit a cyclist. They have flex posts. You actually don't need to keep the flex posts once the cars do it. Cars figure this out fast. They're not really parking in that bike lane. You have solved your double parking issue. You've basically created a bike path in the middle of your street. You're still using paint and flex posts. And here the one thing you do is you pull back your parking a little bit to daylight the intersection so the drivers can see the cyclist coming into the intersection. Again, an inexpensive facility that takes that standard bike lane and makes it appealing to many, many more people. 8th Ave, New York City, and these are big cities that are doing these. Same idea, but they added some extra treatments at the intersections to make them a little bit more safe, so better crossing facilities. You can't quite see it here, but there is a bike signal. And what the bike signal does is gives the signals their own separate phase so that when cars are turning left, the bikes aren't going straight into them. But other than that, again, a simple facility uses the parked cars to protect the cyclists. And getting more complicated, this is Polk Street in San Francisco. It's a street level protected bike lane, but they've done an actual built median instead of flex posts, instead of parked cars. And they put some beautiful, beautiful plantings in there that I'm sure have some special stormwater treatment in them. It's an expensive facility, and you do have to deal with changing the drainage, which gets expensive. But you've taken a next step up, bike path right in your downtown. And similarly, St. Paul, Minnesota, or Jackson Street in St. Paul, Minnesota, they have snow just like we do, so we have no excuses left in this area. Two-way, sidewalk level protected facility. It separates the bikes from the pedestrians. It has, again, plantings to make it look pretty and attractive that have stormwater features. You do have your bike signal right there, so the cyclists get their own separate phase. It's permeable paving almost always when you do these. Two direction on a one-way street. That's sort of the A+ type of facility, but you don't have to start with something that's this extensive. My favorite, Western Ave in Cambridge. I don't know how many of you know Western Ave is essentially how you get to the highway, Mass Pike. It's an ugly 3-lane road, and it was just a drive-by road. They basically took one of the lanes and created this entire facility. Sidewalk level, protected bike lane. Sidewalk is over here, bike lane is here. Excellent, nice landscaping features. This was rated the best bicycling facility of 2015 in the country, and it has transformed this street into a neighborhood. So you had a drive-by street that nobody liked, and you have a beautiful neighborhood now. Incredible success. And lastly, Redondo Beach, California. Anything by water, it just begs out for a two-way bike facility along the water. And again, it makes the whole neighborhood. I keep thinking, why did we put highways right up against water when this is exactly where people should be outside enjoying themselves? And you can see the effects of these facilities. I mean, they just transform a neighborhood. This was what you had in New York City, you know, wide open, disorganized street. It's sort of a free-for-all if you're trying to walk or bike. Even the cars don't like it. You're always double parking. And you look at what they did with it, and now every mode has its location. You've got your bus-only lane, separates the bus. There's nothing worse than leapfrogging with the bus, even if you're a driver or a cyclist. The cars have lanes. They're tight. They're small. They're tight. They're organized. The parking is designated. You have nice crossings for the pedestrians. And again, you have a one-way bike facility, parking protected with a buffer. That's a true complete streets. So protected bike lanes are now ubiquitous. You have more than 400 protected bike lanes in the country now. They're in well over 100 cities. So we're not talking just Washington, D.C., New York City. We're talking cities in North Dakota and Alaska. Every state in the country has these. And it keeps doubling every year. And the statistics are really telling on this. There's a demand for these. When you put these bike facilities in, people bike. And you're seeing in DC, bicycling increased about 200% when they put in some protected facilities on Pennsylvania Ave. That's a tripling of ridership. It increased 200%. Same thing, New York's Prospect Park, increase of 190% ridership, that means ridership tripled. On average, you're seeing a 75% increase, so nearly a doubling when you put these facilities in. People will come out. You're not building for people that are riding now. You're building for all those people that want to ride. And the safety statistics are pretty darn impressive. And what's most impressive about the safety statistics is you put in these protected bike lanes and it's making it safer for all modes. So it's for the pedestrians, for the drivers, and for the cyclists. And a lot of that is that it's organized the roads and the speeds are going down. So I quoted the better of the two studies. This one says when you put in protected bike lanes, you see a 90% reduction in crash injuries. The Ann Lusk study says 28%. I'll take them both. Those are pretty good numbers. New York City was seeing about a 50% decrease in crash injuries. The other things you're seeing is a decrease in sidewalk riding, and that's good, especially pedestrians that don't have the best mobility. They really want that separation from the cyclists. And when you put in the bike signals, the compliance goes up with signals. And in this case, it rose 31 to 81% for cyclists. So this is great. One thing it's done is create a little bike lash. So when people like me, we get out there in front of the public and we talk bike, and we wear our spandex to the meetings, we have a little bit of a problem. So we've created a little bit of a bike lash. But we've gotten a little smarter. So Newton is following the lead of most cities around the country, which have actually taken it one step farther. And we're not even talking about bikes anymore. It's all about complete streets. And complete streets includes bikes, but it goes much farther, and it's working on every single mode. Buses, pedestrians, bikes, and a little bit of cars on the side. Which is a little funny. So people say, hey, in my position, I'm director of transportation. What do I know about cars? And there's a little known fact, I actually do own a car. I just had to sell this one. It was a 1990 Honda Civic hatchback. I was the only one at my 20th high school reunion with a car from my graduation year. It broke down the other day in North Attleboro. I was a little bit desperate to figure out what to do, so I sold it. And I sold it, and I was online, and I'm like, oh my God, these are vintage, they're collector's items. I was like, I'm gonna sell this for a few $1,000s. After negotiating with a few people on Craigslist, I was able to sell it for negative $50. I said, take this car, I don't want to pay for towing. Anyway, I told a friend, and she said she would have taken it for negative 25. Okay, so complete streets sort of takes a step back. And for 50 years in transportation, even since we've been painting bike lanes and doing some minor work, the car has been king. And for 50 years, we have basically created highways around the country. And we've done kind of a damn good job, if you ask me. We have some very good engineers, okay? But it kind of didn't work. And we did that here in the US, but we also did it internationally. So London had a great study. The average speed of a car in downtown London at rush hour, anyone want to take a guess?
2 miles.
Well, it's about, I think it was 3 or 4 miles, but as one of the town selectmen put so well, that's the average speed of a running chicken. So we have a lot of progress to go the speed of a running chicken. By the way, this is why I am not a graphic designer. Okay, so what does it mean for complete streets? Most cities have guiding principles, guiding philosophies, goals. For us in Newton and for most of the cities, it's about creating safe, livable, sustainable, accessible, and smart streets. Safe, you're worried about the safety of all the users of the road. Livable, it's about making vibrant downtown neighborhoods and promoting the economic development in places where people can be outside and sit and talk and walk. Sustainable, that one speaks for itself. Accessible, it's thinking about every single mode, whether it's transit and buses or pedestrians or biking or the car. And smart is taking advantage of some of the technology and also really accommodating it. So how do we deal with Uber and Lyft and where they're going to do pickup and drop-offs, and what do we do with parking on the side of the road? Can we make it smarter and more efficient? I do like this photo, by the way. This was taken in Seattle. And there's one thing that I think is quite unique about this. I worked out there for a year, is everyone is waiting instead of jaywalking right there. And someone asked me, from Boston, I came home and I was just like, oh my God, they're all waiting at the stoplight there to walk across, even if a car's not coming. And they said, Nicole, what do you think it is? And I thought about it, and I'm like, I think it's because pot is legal there. They're just like, whatever, I'll wait. They wait 2-3 light cycles sometimes. They're so mellow. Okay, so let's look at a complete street and all of the features of a complete street, because it is multimodal. So you do have your two-way bike facility, but your two-way bike facility is thinking about pedestrians. So you have, and it's thinking about buses. So you have protected crossings for the pedestrians across the bike facility. You're using green paint in this case to really highlight the bike. Your facility is separate from the pedestrian zone. You have a nice furniture zone. And in the furniture zone, you have bike racks, you have tree plantings. You're trying to make it look pretty. You have, in this complete street, outdoor cafe seating. You have nice wide sidewalks. Your bus stop, it works with protected bike lanes, but you've shifted things. So in this case, your bus stop is here where you wait. You cross the protected bike facility when the bus comes, and then you board the bus. The buses love it because, again, they hate weaving in and out of the bicyclists as well. You've thought through loading zones and taxi areas. At the intersections, you have really tight corner turning radii for the cars. So you're not designing for the biggest truck at the biggest time that comes once a year. You're thinking, how do we make the streets as tight as possible so that the average car is going very slowly and has good visibility for the pedestrians in these intersections. That's kind of a beautiful complete street, if you ask me.
But the car on the lower left is in the bus lane?
Well, no, this is a parking lane, and then they have their 60 to 80 feet with no parking just for the bus stop. So this is actually a designated parking at this point.
Parked, okay.
Yeah. Okay. In Newton, we're actually working on 3 complete streets projects all at once. These are the first 3 that have ever happened in Newton. This one is probably not going to look exactly like this, but it's Needham Street. It's a MassDOT project, but we are doing a protected bike lane on Needham Street. We've taken a 4-lane road and we're making it a 3-lane road in many parts. 3 lanes is often one of the best ways to get space in a road to put in protected facility. You basically lose one of the lanes on each side and have a turn lane when you need it. And the throughput of a street is almost entirely related to what happens leading into the signal. So you don't need the 2 lanes in each direction all along. You just need to widen out to have that turn lane as you approach the signal. Here they have a bike box to make your left turn. Again, your beautiful furniture zone with nice landscaping features. You have nice street lighting, decorative pedestrian scale street lighting, which is a really important feature for all of it. Nice tight turning radii, perpendicular ramps for the disabilities groups. Again, a really beautiful thing. All of course, built to human scale. So if we recap, we've gone in a generation from the car is king. There were no bikes in the 1970s to the 1990s. And then kind of when we got into the city of Boston, bikes were an afterthought. Every once in a while, DPW would put down, or the planners would put down a wide shoulder. So they'd say, let's make the right lane 14 feet and the bikes have a little more space. And it helped a tiny bit, just a tiny bit. And then we got into sort of the Mayor Menino Boston years, and we used paint for our bike facilities. And we carved out space for the cyclist. But again, it's just paint. And now we're into a complete streets for all mode. We're not talking about bikes. Bikes is one of the modes we are accommodating. Most of the facilities are protected at this point when you're looking around, and you're always trying to do protection. You can still use some shares, you can still use bike lanes, but when you can get protection, you always do that. So then people say, well, Nicole, what's the future? And I actually think the future is kind of clear. It's actively discouraging vehicles, probably using pricing. So people say, they say, what would you do if you could do anything? And they always say, well, I would never put in a single bike lane, protected bike lane at all. I would have I'd remove all the parking in a city, have a $10 gas tax. If there's any parking that's left, charge an arm and a leg. And voila, everyone would be biking. So that is mostly what I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to leave the floor open to lots of questions and answers on all of the specific details. So there we go.
You neglected to mention the Dutch Reach that they're actually teaching in driver's manuals in Massachusetts now.
Yes, you mean the turn around? Yeah. So in bike planning, there's actually 5 E's. There's engineering, education, evaluation. I'm going to get it wrong. Enforcement. What's the one I'm missing?
Encouragement.
Encouragement. Yes, lots of events. I focus just on engineering. The other 4 E's are important as well.
I'm curious as to whether any of that wonderful bicycle planning is being done in poor neighborhoods in the cities.
Yes.
Like Roxbury.
Yes, it sure is. In cities all over the U.S., they always do look at geographic equity. The best cities like Seattle have rating systems that ensure there is geographic equity. Same in Boston, you'll do a count of miles in each neighborhood and make sure funding is spent fairly. Absolutely. And then you have, supportive programming as well. A lot of the bike share systems also have subsidized memberships for low-income residents. So I think the what being late to the party, the world of bicyclists, they learned some of the lessons that were mistakes from equity in terms of transit, and are really trying to do it right at the start.
So I like the complete streets concept, but I'm wondering if it's caused congestion in other areas. The cars just move to other spots, or is there actually been a decrease in the number of vehicles on the road?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We're in a transition period, but one of the things when we look at Newton and we look at all these cities is we're getting so much growth every single year. We actually can't accommodate more traffic. We cannot add more bike lanes unless we're going to do eminent domain, or we can't add more car lanes unless we're going to do eminent domain and tear down an entire row of houses. So we have to do something. And the best thing we can do is get people on transit, walking, biking. And we realize, we can't build our way out of the problem. We need to change behavior. And to do that, we need to make it welcoming. So you go to Somerville, Mass. Or Cambridge, they're pretty honest. There's a lot of projects they do, and they know they, in fact, will do things that might reduce the speed for vehicles. And they don't care because they know they're getting that many more people through the intersection total. So, you count total people, and that's what you're after.
I just had a question on the protected bike lanes at the intersection. Do you have any education for pedestrians crossing that lane? Because a lot of times they're just looking at the cars.
Yeah.
And I've seen people walk out in front of bikes.
Yeah. So Walk Boston is actually one of the best walking advocacy groups in the country. They're based in Boston. So in Boston, we worked with them a lot. And we said in the early period of protected bike lanes, there's this transition period where you do need education. So oftentimes temporary signage will go up for the pedestrians. You can flyer the cars. You can get flyers out at every single business along a street. You do a lot with the press. And you oftentimes will have more pavement markings down near the crossings to let the pedestrians know to look both ways. Over time, as these become more ubiquitous in every single city, you'll need less and less of that. Everyone knows you look for cars. Very soon, everyone will know look for bikes.
Well, I imagine it's a problem in Boston because people don't look at the light; they just cross the street.
Well, now that marijuana is legal, who knows?
Question for you about the different circumstances here on the Cape and in non-cities, in towns or
Yeah.
ex-urban areas. We have, as Peter stated, we have specific problems of very narrow and older streets and not
Yeah.
outside. But given your familiarity with either the Cape or other similar situations and being part of the Bikeways Committee, I'm curious if you would recommend certain priorities or approaches given the challenges that we face in achieving complete streets here.
Yeah, it is different everywhere. In one sense, I think it's actually harder in the cities because everything is tighter and there's more competition for space. I I think in the suburbs, something you do want to really look at is oftentimes the roads were built over wide. And oftentimes on a two-way street, you can actually carve out 10 feet on total and have a two-way protected bike lane on a two-way street. So that's going to be a key feature. You know, oftentimes you might be able to widen the sidewalk and make it a multi-use path, which is essentially a nice way to get a protected bike lane. It's case by case, but it's not that different from a lot of the suburbs just outside of Boston, like Newton. So I think planners are still creating the sort of inner suburban, dense suburb model, but we're getting there.
I'd like to engage Peter in this conversation too with the design for Main Street. Do you have a sense of what were they talking about doing a multi-purpose sidewalk at one time on Davis Straits and
Yeah, the latest, I don't want anyone to turn around back. I'm just talking about the people before. The latest design meeting that they had is with the Davis Straits. The consultants were saying that there's so much traffic that's going into the mall and going into those driveway cuts. Because another thing that we're looking at is they're trying to do the access management to all those entrances over there.
Right.
There's no need to have multiple driveways and multiple areas over there. So we're looking at the access management. But there's so many vehicles coming in and out of those areas over there that the starts and stops on the bicycles, they said the engineer recommended that it was better to put a lane in the street in that area. That area, the speed limit on that area, it's like 35 to 40 in that area. But they recommended putting it under the street instead of putting it in the back of the sidewalk.
until they can fix the access problem?
Well, what they were saying is that there was just the vehicles that were turning in and out of all those areas over there. It would just make more conflict points. But that's still, these are items that you want to bring up at the public hearing. And what DOT used to do is they used to do these meetings and then they'd come out with a 25% hearing. And then they'd have public meeting and a 25% hearing. Well, 25% design is basically 60% design. They have all the calculations done. They just slap some other stuff on it. But and then they started figuring out in the last several years that it's easier to go and do a 5% hearing, a 10% hearing, get those comments back in so they can respond to the comments and then include what they want before they start doing the design to it. And we've done it at the Davisville intersection, and we've done it at the Jones Road intersection, and it worked out pretty well. I think a lot of the comments were incorporated. Both those intersections are they're bike friendly, ADA friendly. They brought up to all the standards. But what happens is you get out of the Davisville intersection, you're 200 feet out of the Davisville intersection, you go back into a 1 foot narrow lane again against the curb. And I know bicycles do not like granite curbs with the bike pedals. Something on that area.
You got that, Peter.
What you brought up, Nicole, is the next wave is not just bike lanes, it's protected, separated bike
Yep,
lanes.
yep.
And to do something like that, which I could see possibly being feasible right down on Main Street,
Right.
but we'd have to lose all the parking, all the parallel parking. Is that something other cities and towns have faced and said, well, that's just the price we're going to pay?
Yeah, and you have to be careful, but the primary challenge to go from a standard bike lane to protected is it's usually 2 or 3 extra feet on each side of the road. And those are precious feet that everyone is battling for. It often means losing a travel lane or losing parking. And depending on where Falmouth is, it might be an iterative process where you put down bike lanes now and you get to protect it later, or maybe you take the parking out on one side and you add it elsewhere. You can do stuff with pricing of parking. If there's a lot right nearby, you price the meters much higher right in front of the businesses to encourage quick, short turnover, get employees out of the main street, and you have people more parking in the lot that's cheaper, and all of a sudden you don't have as much of a parking crunch. As long as you're pricing it so that there's still a lot of availability, maybe removing half the parking is okay. One of the key battles of complete streets is travel lane widths. If you can get the city to accept 10-foot travel lane widths as a minimum, even if there's buses, We did that in Boston, 7-foot parking lane. That frees up a lot. Oftentimes cities are saying we need 8 feet for parking, 11 feet for a travel lane. You've lost 2 feet on each side, 4 feet. So that's one of your most important battles is those travel lane widths.
Do you have an opinion on dockless bikes? I just came from California. They're everywhere. Now they're heading east.
I do. So when I was in Boston, we started the Hubway docked system. It's in Boston, Cambridge, Brookline, Somerville. It is a great system, and it is an appropriate system for those dense cities. Newton and the whole strip of cities inside 128 wanted bike share. And we ran the math on the docked system. It's very expensive. Each station with the bike's $50,000. And we did all the math, and we said if we get good sponsorship and good user revenue, our mayors would still be subsidizing those trips at $4 a trip. And we said that's not doable. We put out an RFP. 16 of our cities collectively put out an RFP. We said we'll take docked or dockless. We chose 2 dockless systems, and we'll all be rolling that out as one single system. Actually, 2 vendors, one single system for all 16 cities. And we're still working on how you take bikes into or out of Boston.
No subsidy with the dockless system?
So dockless, the thing that happened in the industry in the last 2 years was twofold. You had the technology, turned over. So dockless became much, much more cost effective. Dockless is about $400 a bike versus a 50,000 station that comes out to $5,000 a bike. So that's night and day. And the second thing is the business model flipped as well. With the Hubway system, those are usually publicly owned systems. City owns the system, pays the operator. The dockless is it's a little more Uber Lyft-like, for better or worse. Private systems using the public right-of-way, venture capital funding. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I'm a firm believer in public transportation. But it would be indefensible for a mayor to subsidize bike trips at $4 a trip. So I think for lower density cities like out here, dockless is a better way to go. You could never have enough stations at our density to make it the origin destination combinations work with the docked system. But I think dockless is awesome. It's affordable, it's doable, and it's here to stay.
I think we're running out of time, maybe. If Nicole, will you stay a little?
I'm
while?
here.
Oh,
Yes,
she's
I can
here.
stay as long as you want.
Okay, there